decided to delete it and rejected it, went back to have more business as usual. As did, I was shocked to see the city of Albuquerque's. Anybody seen our webpage for class? This was just sent to me after our class last week. Haley got onto the internet and found an article from the Albuquerque Journal. And that Greg, remember, Tuesday last week we were talking about how in Albuquerque, that very enlightened place, they actually graduated the impact fees, so the people who are in the center of the region were paying less than people who were building out at the edge. Last November, they decided to scrap it. And they're now back to the average cost impact fee system, which means, generally speaking, the people who are building in the center of the region are paying more than they should be because their actual impacts on facilities and services are less than what they're paying. And the people at the edge of the region are paying less than they should be because the facilities and services that generally don't exist out at the edge and have to be built all new, all at once, are more expensive than what they're paying, and sprawl marches on. And you might ask, how did this happen? It's just politics. Think about it for a second. And this is one of the things that's underlying all of these next several sessions that we're having on smart growth. One of the biggest political challenges with smart growth is the how should we say, unequal. I was going to say inequitable. That's not right. I don't want you to get that connotation. Unequal distribution of benefits and economic benefits and burdens overlaying across a political geography. So here's what happened in Albuquerque. Center of the region, this is a tiered, remember, we were talking last Tuesday, a tiered impact fee system. And so people who are building in the center of the region are paying one rate. People who are in the next ring of the region are paying a rate a little bit higher, representing the higher costs and higher impacts that their development is imposing on their facilities and services. And the people at the edge are paying the highest rate, because, again, it's more likely that their development is going to have higher costs and impacts on facilities and services. Now overlay this map with the district map, the electoral map for the city council seats, for the Albuquerque City Council. Yeah, you see what the problem is here, right? I don't know what it is, but it's probably some sort of map that has a district that maybe goes like this, and then another one that goes like this. And you know where this is going. At some point, you're going to end up with a district that is probably more than one district, or several districts that are predominantly or substantially or maybe even entirely comprised of land in this outer ring. And the people who are on the city council from these districts, are they happy that developers in their district are paying more in impact fees than the people who are developing here in these districts? No, they are not happy. They are supremely unhappy. And the builders who build out in their districts are making sure they know about their unhappiness and are putting the squeeze on them to try to stop this, what they see as being inequitable, a tiering of impacts. And even though good science and good planning and good policy all say that we should have a tiered system because the benefits of the tiered system are not equally shared. It creates a political problem. And we'll see this same kind of thing come up in other contexts and talking about smart growth. Okay, so Thursday's class I understand went well. Eric sent me a list of things that he talked about. What did you find interesting? What was the kind of aha moment? Maybe there were several. Maybe the whole class session was aha. Maybe it was the first time this semester. Wow, somebody's saying something in this class that really means something to me. If that's true, I'm glad for you. I'm glad that happened. But tell me something that was, it made sense to you, that was beneficial to your understanding of land use law.
Silence is deafening.
Oh, well, I'm back.
But it was good to hear what the real life issues are that he has to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's better to get fresh stories than, oh yeah, there goes Bartholomew talking again about the Clinton years. Back when I was in grade school. Yeah. Anything else? He sent me his notes and what other things, the exactions for water rights, that was interesting. I didn't know about that. And then his little checklist for due diligence. I thought that was, yeah, cool. I thought that was really interesting. So, and he handed those out to you, right? Great. All right, so the task today is to work through these two cases, Ramapo and Petaluma, and then to talk about priority funding areas and smart growth legislation in Maryland. So, see, Craig, you want to go today? Craig is, so we're down to Craig and Taylor. Talk to us about Ramapo.
I'm sorry, I'm not prepared yet.
Okay. Volunteers, we're now, those were the last two, and so we've now run our way through the entire list. And so the hot seat will now be an opportunity for extra credit for the rest of the semester. Because we don't have time to go all the way through it again, and it's, after a while, it's just slog through the hot seat list. It's hard for me, I don't know, y'all. So now here's your opportunity to add a little extra check mark next to your name. Now, the rules will be slightly different for extra credit. To just get your basic 20% for your grade, all you really had to do was engage, right? You didn't have to be terribly good. If you want to get extra credit, you have to earn it. So okay, so don't just throw your hand don't just throw your hand up and expect that you're going to get extra credit just because you put your hand up. Oh yeah, there's a hand. You may not want to raise their hand. Extra credit, man. You're great. Hand-eye coordination, bingo. No. So when you raise your hand for this extra credit, make sure that you don't have to be brilliant about it, but you have to have a good command.
And double or nothing? Is that what you're saying?
No, you don't lose anything here. You're not going to be penalized. There's no downside, other than just maybe a little embarrassing. But that's what this class is all about. At least for me, I don't know about you. Okay, so Ryan, you still want to go?
Yeah.
A brave soul indeed. Okay. Golden versus Planning Board of Ramapo. Ramapo.
Yeah.
It's just
Ramo.
Ramo.
Pretty
Okay.
heroic.
So
So a little background on the case. I did some research on it.
he's kind of burnishing this check mark.
So in 1968, the city had grown 300% in 18 years, and they were projected to double again in another 10 years.
Right.
So with all this growth happening, well, the reason why this was happening was because they just opened up a new bridge that connected New York City with Ramapo making it like a 25-minute commute. Awesome, right? All this urban area, open land, place to just go gangbusters. So here comes the city.
I didn't know this. This is great.
They're thinking, and they put in some amendments to the way to get your subdivision set up. So anytime it's new land that hasn't been developed, you have to go through a process. And that no permits would be issued unless they accumulated 15 developmental points.
Right.
These points are directly correlated to capital improvements for the city.
Mm-hmm.
The city's done extensive research, coming up with 4 volumes of stuff to back themselves up.
So this is a well-considered plan, yes?
Right, yes. The biggest issues, I read like another little synopsis on it. I read the case and it was like, I don't get what's going on. And then I read this other little synopsis and it started off kind of clicking, and I kind of went back and found what he was talking about. There's 4 big issues here. Let's see. Statewide planning and regulationism, exclusionism,
Okay.
takings,
Mm-hmm.
and growth management. So
Okay.
we kind of talked about growth management, statewide planning and regulationism. So this is like, where does the state get to, or how does the city get to decide how it grows? And is the state going to affect any of that? And how does this how do these two governing bodies interact with each other?
So this is one of the arguments provided by the opponents and also focused on by the dissent in the opinion that this is not Albuquerque anymore. This is any metropolitan area you choose. Thank you. Let's just watch him for a while. Just watch him. You can see it right there. Let's just watch him go crazy. It's kind of amusing. Look at him. It's kind of frenetic. So this now, the circle, is now been repurposed. Recycled. It is now a metropolitan region. This is the extent of economic influence of a metropolitan region. It is, some people would say, the commute shed. The distance that people are willing to commute to get to work. Beyond here, it's really the sticks, right? And the reality of America today is that in any metropolitan region you choose to look at, the area, the geography within this circle is fragmented horribly in terms for many things, but including, maybe especially, planning and zoning and accommodating change and if it's a fast-growing region, accommodating growth. And so you've got all these literally this is where the word comes from, fiefdoms, that have their own little portion of this geography that they control, and they do all the planning and all the zoning. And it's like most places in America, there is little or no coordination on these growth and planning and zoning related issues at the regional scale or coming from the state. And so if you're a little old Ramapo and you've got 300% growth over a couple of years, and you've got this brand new bridge that Robert Moses just built, funneling all of New York right at your own little burg, and it probably was Robert Moses who built that thing. And you're going, help! And you go to Albany and to the state capitol and say, help! Or to the governor's office, help! And they say, And so you go back home and you say basically, it's all up to us. So what you come up with is a system to try to manage the growth. And in this case, maybe slow it down a bit. The response is, from the home builders and from property owners and from really good, planning academics and other thinkers, is this is a bad way to manage growth on a piecemeal by piecemeal basis. To just take one little piece of this geography, one little piece of this economic pie and housing market, and treat it one way, and it's the same issues are being treated a different way in the next jurisdiction over, and a different way in this jurisdiction over, and a different way in this jurisdiction over. And especially if the issue has to do with more affordable housing, which is generally denser housing, multifamily housing, then there's a strong tendency to beggar thy neighbor and not in my backyard. It's like, we don't want your, you fill in the blank, people here, go into the next town. And they say, go into the next town. And they say, go into the next town, because why? There's nobody who, and you say, these people are bigots. They are nasty, nasty, mean-spirited people. Some of them are. But not all of them are. And you can not completely blame them for taking these kinds of positions that they take, because of back to political geography. The people who are in this town right here, the city government elected by the people, have a job description. The city council members, the mayor, they have a job description. And their job is what? To look after the interests of the people in this town. To their constituents. And it's not their job to look after the interests of the people in this town, in this town, in this town, in the whole metropolitan region, and people outside the metropolitan region that might be moving in, and the people who have not yet been born yet. Not their job. It's not in their job description. In so much of life I found, Woody Allen says 9/10 of life is just showing up. And the other 10th is understanding what the job description is of the person that you're dealing with. If you can understand what motivates them, what they're responding to, what their job description is, I use that informally. You can probably figure out where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing. And this is what makes these kinds of issues so broken in America. And so the dissent is right. The plaintiffs are right. These kinds of issues should be dealt with at least a commuter shed scale. Up the level of the economic need, if not at the state level. But unfortunately, we have precious little leadership on these issues at those levels. The states in the country that are known as good growth management states, and we're going to talk about Maryland, it's one of them. Uniformly, those states, when they adopted their programs, had strong leadership from the governor's office when they adopted them. That's why they got those programs in place. Oregon and Washington, to the extent Georgia has it, Florida, in the Northeast, all of those states, they adopted their programs because the governors set this as a priority. And you can say it really is kind of transcends red state, blue state. New York has never really had that kind of leadership. So Randall Poe does what is logical to Randall Poe. They take care of their own program.
What would it take for a state to change the rules of the game, basically? Because I'm also thinking not just of transportation and housing here, but also thinking of water resources, air pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I mean, it makes more sense to manage at least our valley at a valley level than what it does to manage at a Midvale or South Salt Lake or city level. So what would it take for the state to say, okay, we're just gonna go regional?
It would, if you know the aphorism that in order to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. This is a really big omelet.
And some tough shells.
This is a really big omelet. The problem is that these fiefdoms, these little enclaves, are little power bases, and the inertia and the resistance towards change is enormous. And if you look at, you overlay this distribution with the electoral districts for the state legislature, you find that an awful lot, you've got core jurisdictions, maybe this is the central city here, and maybe that's got its own representation in the state house. But then you've got all these districts out here in the state legislature that are representing these little small units of government that guard their power and authority and jurisdiction tenaciously. It's probably, it sounds really hyperbolic, but they guard their little piece of political power just about as tenaciously as the NRA looks after firearms issues. I mean, it really, and so it is hard. Now, it does happen occasionally. There's an alignment of conditions and personalities and, again, leadership from the governor to make it happen. And it has happened. It happened in Maryland. It's happened in Oregon. Our reading for Thursday is from Oregon, and so you get an example of how at least one state actually did make this happen. Margaret Thatcher just recently passed away, God rest her soul. Not a big hero of mine in general, but one of the things she did do, and it would take a kind of
We know the words you want to use.
what do we call it? Orb. A globe buster. It would take somebody with that kind of tenacity to do what she did with government consolidation. Because what she had, her response, Oregon just said, okay, we're just going to keep all the units of government we have out there, 377 of them, and they're that inside now. Well, it's actually 378. They just added a new town. We're going to keep all those units of government out there, but we're going to give you performance standards that you have to meet. What Maggie Thatcher did was she went in and she started erasing some of these lines. We're just going to consolidate these two towns here. And yeah, while we're at it, we're just going to do like that. Okay? So there were 4 towns there. Now there's 1. Y'all figure it out. The number of units of local government in the UK shrunk by 25 to 30% when she was in power. And so there are, when you look at data from the UK, there are all these asterisks that trying to tell you something about the data. And there's this whole class of data that for jurisdictions that no longer exist anymore. And if you want to kind of trace the data back, you have to aggregate it in certain ways, disaggregate it in other ways. And so that it does occasionally happen. It's really hard to do.
One of the ways the state can do that, to force people to come to the table to discuss mutual planning is through sewer issues, because sewer is generally regionally served, water issues, which is regionally served, and transportation, which is regionally served. And so they just say, hey, if you want to participate in these services, which all cities are, come to the table and let's talk.
Yeah, and so the places that have been successful at doing it, especially at a regional scale, have used kind of an entrepreneurial political strategic model. So Metro, which is the regional government in Portland, and it's hands down the most powerful and effective regional government in the country. They are the only directly elected regional government in the country. They got their start in the 1970s by volunteering to do the things that nobody else wanted to do. It was really, I mean, you think back and you think, wow, Machiavelli would have been really, really proud of these people.
But Metro has their power because they control the sewer, they control the transportation, they control the urban growth boundary.
But they started off by just doing solid waste and stormwater.
Yeah.
Two things, and the zoo. The zoo was falling apart, the animals were running wild over all of the animals. Well, not quite, but it was a mess, and it was just, nobody wanted to deal with the zoo. And of course, nobody ever wants to deal with trash. Solid waste is, and the stormwater problem, they have a problem in wetter climates where you have a combined, regular sewer and stormwater sewer system together. And what happens if it rains too much is that the sewage gets pumped out into the water system, out into the streams and the rivers untreated. And so that's a huge, huge retrofit issue. Nobody wanted to deal with it. And so they created this agency that's, I'll do that, I'll take that on. And so they did that, and they did it really effectively, and something else came along, and there was a new transportation bill. We got to have a metropolitan planning organization. Yeah, I'll do that. And so they started just little bit by little bit. We need a regional park system. Yeah, I'll do that. And then, of course, once you get parks in there, this is what Robert Moses learned. When you get parks in there, you get the kind of the heart and soul of people in the neighborhoods, because they like parks, right? And so you go around starting building parks, that's, when you put your billboard up, Metro, Metro built this park, and Metro did, this Metro, they're sounding kind of good. And so now they have taxing authority, and they have ability to require local jurisdictions to comply with their policies. They have vertical consistency, right? Strong vertical consistency. Metro has its own comprehensive plan with its own zoning regulations, and local governments within the metro area have to comply with those. They have to change their plans and change their zoning ordinances to be consistent with the regional ordinances and plans. Whoa! What country am I in? This just doesn't sound like America. So, we've gotten to your first issue. So that's what they're talking about when they talk about kind of state coordination and regionalism, and the lack thereof. And when you're a judge, you're faced with this system that people are complaining against. They filed a lawsuit trying to strike it down, and they're saying this kind of stuff should be done at a larger scale. And what do you do as a judge? You say, yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, but that would be the perfect world, and this is not, we're dealing with the world that, as it's presented to us. Okay, so let's move into that. They come up with a growth management system, and you've already described the point system, and it's for 5 different areas of public facilities. Sewers, parks, drainage facilities, firehouses, roads. So it's a pretty limited list when you think about all the things that go into making a community and all the facilities that you have to have. Where are schools on this? I mean, schools are mentioned here, but that's just in the category of recreation facilities. I hope they, are they talking about PE or? I don't know. So, what happens if you don't have enough points to develop? What if there's not sufficient sewer capacity to deal with it?
That's fine. If you don't have enough points, then you pay for the new thing that the capital improvement the city needs. You pay a little more.
So you either wait for the city to provide it.
Right. You can wait
Maximum of 18 years.
Maximum 18 years, or you pay for it yourself. Sorry. I don't know how that can be feasible, but you pay for it yourself. I mean, I can understand, you know,
Or maybe you contribute,
fees and stuff.
to the facility that's necessary to handle whatever it is that you need to get done. Or you build a firehouse, or you deal with the roads. My guess is that most places, most developments that went ahead of the town got their points, because you could get more points in one area and less in other areas. So it's not like you had to, hit home runs on each one of those 5 areas.
Yeah.
So my guess is they probably bought up their points in the parks and the roads categories, maybe drainage facilities.
Yeah. And that makes sense, because then the city gets what it wants. Like,
Right.
it wants more open green space.
So I'm glad you focused on this, because the first reading of this, you start reading and you get this sense that they're talking about, and I asked, even rereading it today, I put this question mark on the first page. It's like, we're turning residential development in residential zones to a conditional use, because that's what it kind of sounds like. We're creating this new category of special permit uses defined as residential development use. It really kind of sounds like to build a house, it's a conditional use, even if it's in a residential zone. And that's not what it is. The judge here, or I should say the clerk working for the judge, because they ought to do the real work here, is just a little imprecise, because we're talking about subdivision approval. That's what's being regulated here, the subdivision approval, and you focused on that. So,
There's the other areas, exclusion, takings.
right, but before we get into that, so we've got this system. In order to be able to subdivide, you need to have 15 points showing that there is adequate capacity in these key identified facilities and services to be able to handle the demands from the new growth.
Genius.
And this is what comes to be known. It's not referred to here by this term, but it comes to be known under this term, concurrency. Other allied terms include what is that one? Now, of course, it's leaving my brain. Following, woo! Montgomery County has this system. Okay, and it's going to come back. Yeah, the idea is to make sure that facilities and services are there at the time that they're needed, and that it's kind of the same idea that we were talking about with impact fees. Remember we talked about how you calculate impact fees? And what you're doing is you're setting standards, service standards, for all the key services and facilities in your town, in your region, in your community. And then you're determining, bless you, whether you meet those standards currently or fall below them. And then you do a projection into the future to see whether you will meet them or fall below them in the future. And then develop if you're going to fall below, you develop a capital plan to be able to remedy those deficiencies. And then you prorate the cost of the facilities that are in that capital plan and allocate on a per unit basis those costs to all the new development that will come online during the life of the plan. This is basically the same idea. It's just that instead of using it as the basis for an impact fee, you're just saying, you wait. You can't build unless we have adequate capacity in our key facilities and services to support your project. If it's not there, you can't build. You just have to wait it out or pay your own way. Build it yourself.
So the analogy that I Kevin kept drawing upon is a factory. It produces widgets, and if it doesn't have the proper capital in place, the proper machines in place to manage that production, then you don't get to do that new widget that the development team has come up with. You have to wait until the proper capital reserves have been established, and then you get to buy your new fancy equipment. Until then, you wait until it wears out and you continue to use the existing infrastructure.
So our purpose here is, as at least as the court describes it, is to provide an overall program of orderly growth and adequate facilities through a sequential development policy commensurate with progressing availability and capacity of public facilities. Whew, man, somebody wrote a good brief. And of course, you already referenced this. On our first paragraph, you know which direction this is going. Where the court says, well, there was a 4-volume study that led to a comprehensive new town law that's developed a new master plan that's been implemented through a comprehensive zoning ordinance and additional studies on drainage and sewage leading to a capital budget for the next year and a capital program for the following 12 years. It's like, oh my gosh, who built this widget? And you say, yeah, we know who's winning this case. The town has got a well-considered plan. Okay, so if you walk in there, and like I said before, one of the key facilities is not adequate, you can't get your 15 points, you do have options. You've already mentioned one. You can go ahead and pay for the improvements to bring it up to snuff. And they don't mention it here, but there's probably some sort of reimbursement system so that as additional development comes online or tax revenues come in that would normally pay for that facility, you can get reimbursed. The city would be in the city's interest to do it that way, by the way, because then they can insist on certain quality standards in the construction of whatever it is that the developer is going to build. And the city or the town would want to do that. But there are other provisions here, the kind of safety valves. We call them in lawyer talk, we call them savings provisions, meaning that that the thing that's being regulated is not being so tightly regulated as to have no options. And it's usually these are put in place because it's good policy. You need to have some flexibility. There are so few times in life when one size does fit all. You know, and we're dealing with real estate here. We're dealing with land. Every piece is unique. And so every development that's going to come forward is going to be slightly different. And if you just have a one-size-fits-all system, it's probably not always going to work the way you want it to do. So you need to have some flexibility. But it's also strategic and politically important, especially if you're going to get sued, to have that flexibility because you could say, no, Your Honor, of course, you know, if the developer comes in and there isn't adequate sewer capacity, they have plenty of options. We're not saying they can't do anything with their land. They can build it themselves. What are their other options? We've got a whole list here.
I don't know. What page are you on?
This is page 632. That's all right. They have the opportunity to build on the lot as it is. And you may say, well, that may be cold comfort to somebody that has a 40-acre piece that wants to divide it up into, 80 half-acre lots, and you're telling them they can build one house on it. Well, that's whoop-de-doo. But you understand that one of the challenges is going to be a takings challenge, which you've already alluded to, Ryan. And if you can build one house on there, can we say, in all honesty, that this is a wipeout, that this is a Lucas kind of situation? No. There is still economic value left in the property, even if they can't subdivide. Also important to note is that there is a variance provision. The point requirements may be varied should the board determine that such a variance or modification is consistent with ongoing development. And that once granted, the permits are fully assignable, meaning that even if you pull the permit, you decide you're not going to do the deal, you can, as we presume, assign this permit to the purchaser of your parcel. And that is going to be something of value. And so these are all good things to be able to show the court to defeat an alleged taking. So, so this is not a taking. What about you mentioned the issue of exclusionism. What are they referring to?
So, it's basically saying you're excluding people with low income to build here now because nobody in their right mind can afford to build your power plant or whatever, your firehouse or whatever it is, and have a place to live. Unless you want them to live in a firehouse. They say you're basically excluding them. And so they had, I guess they had several lawsuits that detailed low-income housing provisions and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. The town basically said no, we don't exclude people with low income. Actually, we invite people with low income to live in these areas and something to that effect.
Yeah, and I think what you're remembering is the Petaluma case, because that's really highlighted more in Petaluma, or maybe it's brought up in some of your additional reading.
Yeah.
But the court does talk about what we refer to kind of obliquely as the right to travel. And it really isn't about travel, it's basically the right to move into a new community. I've mentioned it before, it's been a couple months. But it's one of these implied rights that's not listed specifically in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. But we understand it as the ability to be able to live where we choose, and not to be forced to live someplace that we do not wish to. And it's a pretty fundamental tenet of our self-definition as Americans. And one of the reasons we have it is because that's not the case in a lot of other places in the world. There are many other places in the world where you live where the government tells you to live. And if you want to move, you have to apply to the government for permission to move to a new town. And even some of the Western democracies in Europe are like this. I don't know if it's still the case, but I know for a while in the Netherlands, if you were moving from Amsterdam to The Hague, you had to fill out forms, and permission is readily granted. I don't understand, the way I understand it is that they don't withhold that permission very often, but you still have to apply for permission from the government to be able to move from one town to the next. And that is something, at least in this country, we're highly opposed to, very sensitive to. And so that's a kind of an issue that governments or that courts are looking for in these kinds of situations where there does appear to be some sort of attempt to exclude others, particularly others that may be deemed to be undesirable.
Where does that right? I would feel upset if somebody told me I couldn't move, so I love it. But where do we find that in the Constitution, or where is that implied? Is it part of the First Amendment, or?
It's implied. It's what we call one of the penumbral rights, along with the right to privacy. There's no specific provision that provides the right to privacy, but we understand that one exists. And it's in the shadow of the penumbra of, at least the right to travel is in the penumbra of the Interstate Commerce Clause that reserves to Congress the right to regulate commerce between the states, and the Due Process Clause, and the Equal Protection Clause. And maybe First Amendment, free expression, or the
state you like the most.
The right to assemble. Yeah, those are the ones that I've heard used to try to explain it. It's one of those things that we just understand. It's a common law right, basically, is what it is. We refer to the Constitution and look to the Constitution for chapter and verse on a lot of the things that we call rights in this country. But there's an awful lot, even with stuff related to due process. It just says due process. What does that mean? Well, the courts define what due process is, and so I'd say it's derived by the common law, from the common law. So note taking. what's the other big challenge, Brian, to this system? Actually, there are two others.
We talked about growth management, taking exclusion, statewide planning. I don't know. Those are the ones I picked up.
Does the town have the authority to do what they've done? Yeah. So says you. Again, show me the chapter and verse in state law that says, that gives municipalities the authority to enact such a phased kind of quasi-moratorium system. Because that's what the dissent says. This is nothing but a moratorium. It may be chronologically phased, but this is a moratorium. They don't have the authority under state law. So this is a delegation issue, right?
Delegation of power.
Right, and you remember this phrase, ultra vires? Outside, what the plaintiff is saying, and the dissent agrees, is that the municipality is acting outside of their delegated authority, outside of the authority delegated to them by the state. And therefore, their actions are null. So what does the how do you think? I mean, you don't have that right in front of you there, but just how would you think the majority of the court would get around that issue? Because the plaintiffs are right. When you look at the authorizing legislation that gives Ramapo the authority to engage in planning and zoning, there aren't the words, there aren't the provisions in there that directly cover this kind of a system. So how does the court get there? So they're interpreting a delegation.
Yeah, so the legislature has delegated authority to the city.
And the court is interpreting that delegation. What kind of lens is it looking through when it interprets that delegation?
They didn't know.
Yes.
Oh,
This is a Dillon issue. This is absolutely a Dillon issue. And the majority says, yeah, they don't specifically, explicitly list this among the various powers in that section of state law, but it's implied. They have the authority to regulate the subdivision of land and to ensure that facilities and services are protecting the health, safety, and welfare. And this is a general health, safety, and welfare. Who wants to have a bunch of subdivisions out there with inadequate sewers, right? So this is really a health, safety, and welfare issue, and we think it's included by implication in the delegation of authority. So the majority here is definitely a non-Dillon, has a non-Dillon attitude, because they're willing to look at the delegation very broadly. The dissent is opposite that. The dissent is going, look right here on this chapter and verse, this state statute, it's not listed here, therefore it was not granted. Very Dillon perspective, and that is the basis of the dissent. Now, last issue. It also has to do with the local government authority. Can a municipality engage in a regulatory action like this one if it isn't related to an area of legitimate government concern?
It isn't, but it is.
It is, but the plaintiffs are contesting that, at least implicitly. This is none of the government's concern, or it's only tangentially the government's concern. This is not a legitimate area for government regulation. In other words, it falls out of substantive due process, right? So the plaintiff's claims are ultra vires, it's outside of the government's authority. The court says no, using a non-Dillon perspective. It's implied. The plaintiffs say, this is a takings. The court says, no, you still have economic value in your property. The plaintiffs say, this is exclusionary. The court says, no, just because it's slowing down growth, it's not closing the gates. If it were, that would be, I think the court would have gone a different way. They'd say this is just phasing growth over time, and so it doesn't violate the implied right of travel. And then lastly, this is effectively promoting a matter of the community's health, safety, and welfare. And we know by that list of all those darn studies at the beginning of the opinion that it's not arbitrary or capricious. So this case stands for the legitimacy of managing growth, especially when it comes to matching growth levels to the ability of a community to be able to handle it and deal with it, especially in facilities and services. Yeah.
So just a little nugget of about Ramapo. 2006, Money Magazine ranked Ramapo as the 49th best place in the United States and the best place in New York State to live. Arts and leisure, business housing, low crime rates, open spaces, parkland,
good sewers,
determine the town's rankings. In the category of park space, percentage of land set aside for gardens and parks, the town finished first. The town received the highest rating and one of the best in the country for its open spaces and parkland.
You know what the problem is with those kinds of ratings? Because now Ramapo has even more growth to manage. This was always a problem when we were I was in Oregon, and we always said, you know, this is part of the problem here is that Oregon has this reputation that now Ramapo apparently shares of being really good at protecting health, safety, and welfare. We're protecting community quality of life, you know? And because they know how to deal with growth. They know how to deal with growth. It's not overrunning their schools and their roads and their parks, and it's high quality, and they know how to manage it well. And because they do, they now have to do it even better because now that reputation is drawing even more people. In Oregon, it was Tom McCall, who was the maverick kind of firebrand governor who led the charge for their growth management system. One of his most famous lines, he was internationally famous, or at least nationally famous for this, and it's rare for a governor of a small population state of Oregon to get on the national stage. But he made these speeches when he was going around the country, to National Governors Association kinds of meetings and the various things that governors go to. And he would say, yes, Oregon's a lovely place. Please come and visit. But for goodness sakes, don't move here. and which absolutely outraged all the economic development people. Because what? Our governors should be out there beating the drum, trying to get people to come, And he's telling people not to show up, not to come, not to move. They were ready to have his hide. But you people in marketing, pay attention. This created interest in Oregon like you wouldn't believe. This was actually, and I don't think he intended this. This was the most brilliant ad campaign, marketing campaign for the state, because all of a sudden everybody's like, "What do you got over there? You don't want us to come? What you got in there, Oregon?" And people check it. Oh. And so it really caught on. Okay, that was very nice, Ryan. Great job. Okay, Petaluma. The case of the home builders of Sonoma County versus Petaluma. Brendan, great.
So Petaluma is a city about an hour north of San Francisco, off Freeway 101 or Highway 101. And I guess from what it sounded like in the background is that in the 1970s they started experiencing population growth, people working in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and they were living in Petaluma or north of it and commuting, which, by the way, they call it the Novato Narrows in between Petaluma and San Francisco, and to this day it is an atrocious commute. And I really don't know how people do that day in and day out.
You're from this part of the country, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. There's sense some inside knowledge here.
It's really bad. I mean, I love living in Utah because the traffic isn't nearly as bad as that. But anyhow, so kind of like the last case, the town did the, oh my God, what's happening? And so they put a moratorium from what it sounded like, and they developed a well-considered plan to deal with this. And so they wanted to limit the number of dwelling units, which is a lot different than single-family homes or housing units, to 500 units a year. And one of the main points here was that didn't affect the kind of like single-family detached homes, which kind of accounts for a large majority of sprawl in that area. So they went on to, and they kind of overlooked that. They didn't enforce that across the board. The 500 unit limitation, or the under 4 units, they approved, right?
Yeah, if it were under 5.
Under 5.
Under 5 units were not considered to be counted towards the cap.
Towards the cap. So that would mean that people were still able to get permits for single-family detached houses.
No, get 4 of them.
For 4 of them.
Yeah, up to 4. It's another one of those escape hatches, right? And savings clauses. So again, somebody comes and sues them, as they were sued, and claim a taking. You say, wait a minute. Still economic value left in getting as much as you wanted, but you're getting something, and a lot more than Ramapo. Ramapo only let you do 1 house. Here you can do 4.
So that was intended, or there was a reason why that's...
Well, I think it was also because what had changed in the town before the kind of onslaught of the early 1970s, the growth was happening in little small increments, probably in 4 or 5 units at a time. And then what happened, starting in the early 70s, is you started to get national builders coming in and building hundreds of units at a time. And I think that was what they were most concerned about, was the large-scale builders that were coming in, not necessarily the small mom-and-pop shops.
And also, part of this plan was you have a green belt around the city.
Right.
But that didn't seem to come up too much.
Yeah, I was surprised about that.
It was mostly just about the housing units. So initially, this already had went to a lower division court, and they ruled that this was unconstitutional. Right. So they ruled in favor of Sonoma County.
No, in favor of the home builders.
Or the home builders.
The plaintiffs.
So now it's Sonoma County that's suing the city.
The county's not involved. It's confusing about that. It's a construction industry association of Sonoma County. So it's the building industry. I just HBA is easy as home builders association. But it's basically the development industry that are suing. So now Petaluma is appealing that lower court decision.
And the builders are claiming due process clause for the 14th Amendment equal protection of the law, that this is arbitrary and capricious, this type of plan, restrict growth.
And outside, it says here on page 661, that this action is falling outside the scope of any legitimate governmental interest. Specifically because, it says just be above that, because it is denying and limiting the natural population growth of the area and the implied right of travel. So, Kyle, they're the court's linking it for us and saying, okay, that's kind of sourced in the due process clause of the 14th.
And that's why the appeals court brings up the interstate commerce clause.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because I was like, what in the, what are you thinking?
So, and then we've got all these other bells and whistles, right? So we've got 500 units, but it's allocated according to a point system. And the point system is very complex, and you know, so you get points for this and points for that, conformity with the plan, environmental design, good architecture. Oh yeah, we know what that is. Moderate and low-income dwelling units, recreational facilities, and then we've got this division between east and west because they're trying to solve a problem where all the growth is going on the east side and nothing's going on the west side, so we're going to try to divide it up 50-50 geographically, and then 50-50 single-family, multi-family. You ever heard of such a thing? They actually do it in Oregon, and when it first went into the same requirement, when it first went into force, people were shrieking, including the home builders were shrieking over this. And then I think it was largely because of a misunderstanding, because the requirement wasn't that you had to build 50-50 multifamily, single family. The requirement was on local government that they had to zone to allow 50-50 single family, multifamily. And what it ended up doing was reducing the amount of regulation, relaxing the regulations on residential development, and allowing a lot more ranges and densities than were formerly allowed. And it actually ended up working out to huge profits for the building industries because there was all this pent-up demand for multifamily housing. And they actually ended up, some years after the regulation got adopted, they actually ended up building 60-40 multifamily, single family. More units, 20% more units, multifamily than single family. And in other years it would flop, back and forth. But that was one of the big aha moments. It was like, people were crying, this is regulation, government regulation, it's interfering with the market. When in fact what it did is it freed up the market and allowed a lot more flexibility in the market to better meet consumer demand. And so, so when you see that 50-50 and you think, oh, that's outrageous. Well, actually, it's probably not that outrageous, and not as outrageous as it might look at first blush. So is this a legitimate set of purposes? Because it's not a single purpose, is it? I mean, that's the thing, is that the plaintiffs here want you to think this is exclusionary, as Ryan was telling us before. This is exclusionary. This is trying to force people out who want to move to Petaluma, and it's and it's only going to be the rich people that can move here.
And they call that the arbitrary and capricious side of the debate. So, well, the moral of the story is kind of simple because the court said, well, this is this plan protects the public welfare, and it came down to the police power. So that's how they deemed it as the plan.
They also address this kind of regionalism issue, don't they?
Yeah, I think in page 664, the top paragraph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It kind of ties back to the last case, I think.
And then they cite, you see after, they say, we agree with the appellees, unlike the situation in the past, most of the municipalities today are neither isolated nor wholly independent from neighboring municipalities, and that, consequently, unilateral land use decisions by one local entity affect the needs and resources of the entire region. See Gold versus Town Roundel. Does not necessarily follow, however, that the due process rights of builders and landowners are violated merely because a local entity exercises its own self-interest. What did you think about this case, this Supreme Court case that's referenced here, Valterra?
I don't think I really have an opinion on it. So.
I thought it was kind of amazing, really, and I've read the full Supreme Court opinion from that case a number of years ago, and it really is kind of. I mean, I'm not sure I would have come down on that, but basically, we're talking about a very exclusive suburb that has essentially one zone. A single zone for the entire town. One zone. Single family, residential, boop, that's it. And with a minimum lot size, it guarantees that basically everybody who is going to live here now lives here. Unless they die or move out. Yeah, Jared?
I thought that case was interesting because last year I studied a case, I don't remember the name exactly, but it was that the NACP, that association, they were suing this town because they had basically done the same thing, and the mayor said, we can't afford to hear them leave.
Yeah.
And so they sued them, and they had to reverse the zoning.
But see, that's New Jersey.
Is that?
Yeah, this is NAACP sued Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And in years past, we've read the Mount Laurel decisions in this class. They're very complex. But at their core, we see at least the New Jersey Supreme Court come out very differently in pretty comparable circumstances to the Belterre case before the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court says they want to, exclude others and create this little enclave. That's a legitimate governmental purpose. Really? My politics, favor more of the New Jersey Supreme Court. It struck down the Mount Laurel zoning ordinance for the reasons that you cite, because basically it was fiscal zoning dealing with at a residential level. Their rationale, and they were unabashed about it, was we do not allow multifamily construction in our town because the people who live in those structures do not pay enough taxes. And so we are zoning them out of existence in our town for fiscal reasons because they will not generate enough tax revenue for us, or as much as we would like. And they're fine people. We have nothing against them. They just don't have enough money for us. And New Jersey Supreme Court. The problem with the New Jersey opinions is that the court I think was absolutely correct in its legal reasoning, but then it tried to manage the implementation of the case after it made its decision. So it's an initial decision, its first decision, because there's, I don't know how many sequels there are. It's almost as many as Rocky films. There's Mount Laurel 1, and Mount Laurel 2, and Mount Laurel 3, because they keep sending it back down, and the city keeps finding a way to subvert what the court's intent was, and so the court tries to manage this. They actually have a master, they're called the master of the court, who manages the remand of the case to make sure that the town does what the court wants. And pretty soon you start to ask yourself, wait a minute, there's kind of a branch of government issue here, because now you're starting to act like an executive branch institution implementing a law that you've created yourself, which is a legislative branch function, and so it turns into this big mess. And in the end, is there more affordable housing in Mount Laurel today than there was before that first lawsuit was brought? I've heard not. I've heard that for all its self-righteous glory, that it hasn't actually fixed the problem. And so, Petaluma, what's Petaluma like today, Brendan?
It's a nice city, but there's definitely sprawl.
Is it affordable?
I don't know, is anything affordable in California?
Yeah, I know, in the Bay Area, I don't know, that's an oxymoron. But
I didn't live there personally, but I grew up near there. And I can't answer that. I'm not sure.
What do you think about the SMART train? SMART trains, whatever they call it. It's the Sonoma Marin area rapid transit system. They're building a train from the docks at Larkspur up to Santa Rosa, or is it going further
I
than
think
that?
it goes to like
You cut it, or-
Cloverdale. Or,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So, and it goes through Petaluma, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds like it's following 101.
Yeah, it's following the 101 corridor.
I was unaware of that. So it's like light rail or?
Heavy rail, commuter rail.
Yeah.
Or at DMU.
Yeah, it's going to be a DMU, so kind of like front runner in the sense that it's going to be diesel commuter rail style, but it's going to be more on the scale of a TRAX train, so smaller.
So it's one of these hybrid technologies. It's diesel, but it kind of looks like rail.
Yeah, I remember being a little kid on the 101 near Santa Rosa with my mom and dad or by Petaluma, and they would always, oh, they need to build another lane or a couple more lanes.
Well, they
jam
did.
traffic, and they did, and it's still like that. So I think the commuter rail is probably a decent way to go.
But do you think that'll generate even more development out there?
Probably.
Yeah. Because
It's
if
a
I were in
nice
San
place to
Francisco,
live.
you know, I would
Yeah.
think, oh, that, Sonoma County, wine country, oh, that's so nice, but I couldn't handle the commute. Oh, but now I've got a train. now I'm thinking of maybe I'll buy that house in Petaluma.
Yeah,
So,
you might be able to legally grow your own weed there too. So.
Well, there you go. Even more reason. Okay, let's talk about Maryland here for a second. Maryland is one of these fabled smart growth states. It's referred to in the article here, kind of a third generation smart growth state. And so we had growth management, the quiet revolution, as John DeGroote writes about these, or wrote about these issues, called in the 1960s, places like Ramapo and Petaluma, who are kind of quietly developing their own systems for managing growth. And then what we get in the early 1970s are states like Hawaii and Oregon and New Jersey developing kind of a more performance-based system, and that's what we're going to read about for Thursday. And then after that, we get another tier of states that adopt growth management legislation that is more incentive-based and less regulatory-based. And the Maryland system is kind of the poster child for this generation of legislation. And the idea basically is that throughout the state, areas will be designated for state investment in facilities and services, these priority funding areas. And a whole group of PFAs are identified statutorily in the legislation. And then there's this opportunity for counties and municipalities to petition for additional designation of PFAs. And kind of like maybe somewhat similar to Ramapo, the idea here is not to shut down development outside of the PFAs or to regulate in a heavy-handed way development outside of these PFAs, but to allow growth to happen in those areas, but without state funding, requiring developers who are developing in those outside PFAs to kind of pay their own way, to build their own infrastructure in facilities and services. That is the whole idea. If you build inside of a PFA, you get to take advantage of state funding for transportation and sewer and water and other facilities and services. If you build outside of PFAs, you're on your own, buck. And in theory, that's appealing, right? I mean, we're kind of American. We like our freedom. We don't want to have too many regulations. So let's use the power of the dollar to send the right economic signals here, and maybe in a way, kind of like with Albuquerque, we'll just make it more expensive to grow in places that are less efficient in terms of facilities and services, and that makes economic sense. As you read here, it hasn't quite worked out the way theory and the authors had hoped. The theory would project and the authors of the bill would hope. And it's unfortunate. We have, you might not know it, but we have a kind of a mini Maryland smart growth system here in Utah. In 1999, Governor Huntsman, Levitt back then. Yeah, it was Levitt. This is before Huntsman. Governor Levitt was a friend of Paris Glendening, who was the governor of Maryland when this legislation was passed in Maryland. And so he proposed the Quality Growth Act of 1999 to the Utah legislature, and it was basically the same system. Our legislature, unlike Maryland's, wasn't too keen on it. They beat it up well and good and yanked most of the guts out of it and created what got adopted finally as the Quality Growth Act. Created the Quality Growth Commission and gave it more or less advisory responsibilities and some authority to divide up some funds for acquisition of open space. But very quietly, the Quality Growth Commission has been kind of maybe somewhat similar to Metro in Portland, has been kind of creeping into other things. And they now have a system where they certify communities as quality growth communities if they meet certain criteria. And those quality growth communities, the incentive here is that communities that are designated by the commission as quality growth communities get preferential treatment in access to state funding for facilities and services. And so in a very kind of small way, Utah has kind of nudged its nose under the smart growth tent. It would be interesting if there are any current or potentially future PhD students who would be interested in this topic. I think you could do the kind of analysis that Rebecca Lewis does in this article for Utah, and you would probably find that the results are even more lukewarm. How could you be more lukewarm? Than in Maryland, but it still would be kind of intriguing to make maybe a comparative analysis between the Maryland system and what we've ended up here in Utah. You know, her conclusion at the end of the day is the implementation of this system has not been robust. If you look at her recommendations at the end of the article, she says, first of all, this whole system is not integrated really anywhere, at the state level or at the local government level with the planning system. There's precious little mention of the whole PFA system in the comprehensive plans of cities and counties. And the state, segregates the different functions of PFA and planning into different agencies. And then there's this, I don't know if you caught this, we've got a horizontal consistency problem, where you've got other state agencies that are not willing to play and not willing to cooperate. And this is a common problem in areas where you do have leadership at the state level to take on these issues. You frequently have turf wars between competing state agencies. You'll get the planning agency that's been designated as the kind of the favored son here, the darling child. We're dealing with planning issues, trying to get other state agencies to pay attention to them and to abide by their policies. It's really hard to do, especially with the DOT. The DOT is always the first. So I hope this gave you a little insight on at least another approach to this issue of trying to match growth with facilities and services. What we'll read for Thursday is we'll read about Oregon. There's one case there listed, Thousand Friends versus LCDC, Lane County. It's on the webpage.